The school headmaster has called regarding a deer trapped in railings on the perimeter of a school playground. He's tried various agencies but no one will support him. He's worried about letting the children out to play, as the deer was making screaming noises when approached. This may not be deemed to be a statutory duty. However, it may be considered to fall under the Fire and Rescue Services Act, Section 11, power to respond to other eventualities. In this case, a situation affecting the life and health of animals. It may also be considered under the criteria Animal Rescue Small. Equally, it may be referred in the first instance to the RSPCA, but assistance is likely to be requested for extrication. So follow the 10 steps and that will help to mobilise accordingly. In this instance, the species grouping is wildlife. There's a single animal and it's known to be a deer. But correct identification would determine that this would be a Muntjac deer and falling under the context of non-indigenous species, which then throws up other legal issues. In terms of identification, a really good app is made by the British Deer Society, which will give you really clear indications of the type of animals that you're dealing with. In considering the situation, it's fairly clear that the animal is trapped and there is a potential life risk to that animal if the situation is not rectified. But I think there's a little bit more to this that needs to be taken into consideration. Clearly, no one is accepting responsibility for this incident at this time. It's having a direct impact on the running of the school, the mental health of the children perhaps, so there could be cause for this to be considered a moral or societal responsibility on our behalf to help to resolve the situation. Given that we've identified that it's a Muntjac deer and falling within that non-indigenous species group, then the situation itself may or may not fall within the organisational capabilities of the Fire and Rescue Service alone. There are legal implications here, and those legal implications may lead to the need for direct action, potentially in the form of euthanasia. So we would need to establish what organisations should be involved with this situation and try to resolve it in a partnership approach. Considerations for the environment are fairly straightforward. The animal is entangled, there's no direct environmental hazards, but also think around this situation. Where is it in regards to proximity to the school? Are the school children likely to be leaving in the next half an hour, for instance? Is this going to have a direct impact on their well-being or your ability to undertake the task? In terms of the people that are at the scene, really it's restricted to staff at the school and the children themselves, and the children are being actively managed to avoid them coming into contact with the deer itself. But they'll all be quite emotionally engaged with this because they all know about it, and of course there will be a hope that this would be resolved in a satisfactory way. What we need to consider is the fact that we've already identified a potential legal issue with the release of that deer, and we do need to engage some expertise to support us to make decisions about it, and this may take some time, which may lead us into a different part of the school day and their routine where perhaps members of the public might gather and a social media aspect may come into play. So it's really important that we understand who's going to be needed at the scene, who's at the scene, and plan for the developing aspects of that scene throughout the time that we would be dealing with it. Now, thinking about the non-indigenous species aspect of this deer, then we have two options really. One is to carry out a controlled release, an emergency release into an environment where it's free to leave the site. Alternatively, we may need to release it into a contained situation and it may need to be euthanized. So we need to think very carefully before deciding what our task is here, because that task may change depending on the legalities of the situation or the practicalities of the scene. Additional animal risks, well, Muntjac deer may seem very small in stature, but their breed characteristics will inform us that there may be some risks to take into consideration, particularly the sharp tusks that are more visible in bucks. So just need to think about the physical injury risk from these animals, and then to the animal we need to think about capture myopathy. This is a stress response which may cause the animal to die on scene or later on, as physiologically their body deals with the stress of the situation. Struggling may cause further physical harm, of course, so one of the first things that you need to do at a deer incident really is to cover it up so that it's plunged into darkness, and that reduces that stress and reduces that chance of further injury and harm. When thinking about your plan, if we were to take no action at this point, then clearly suffering would continue. There would be continued distress for the children, and if we took the wrong actions, that may risk human safety, it may compromise the animal's welfare, and it may contradict Section 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So I think the important thing in terms of initial plan is to liaise with the RSPCA and the school to minimise the suffering to the animal and to create a plan according to the legal and practical measures required. You need to consider keeping the noise and stimulation to a minimum to avoid capture myopathy, and as I said before, covering the animal with a sheet is a really good option here. Now, the deer may need to be euthanized on the basis of viability, or if criteria for release under the Wildlife and Countryside Act cannot be met. So you need to consider the wider implications of euthanasia due to the environment and location. Given a safe system of work, I think it's appropriate that default firefighting PPE would be satisfactory in dealing with this situation. 2 levels of skill sets required to resolve this situation. Clearly, a controlled release under guidance of a subject matter expert would be within the capabilities of an initial trained crew, but you do need more advanced level guidance and subject matter expertise to interpret the legal aspects of this situation and, if necessary, carry out euthanasia and carcass removal. So actions really will be dictated by the level of support that you have on the scene. Potentially you would go into a defensive mode, keep the animal calm, removing stimulation whilst awaiting specialist guidance, and then moving to an offensive position, actions to carry out controlled euthanasia or release of the animal. And the justification would be actions based on welfare-centred plan within the legal parameters of the Wildlife and Countryside Act.